Hello and welcome back to another tasty tutorial. Yesterday we're taking a look at how to create the effect from this short video that I've posted a while ago. Now I'm gonna be showing you a couple of techniques in this one, not necessarily the rendering process, the texturing process and stuff like that. This is just the concept of the animation that you can apply to your own project as you wish. Now, as always, there's going to be a free resource file in the description below that you're more than welcome to check out and download for yourself. As always, leave a like, drop a comment, it always helps me out a lot. And if you can, subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. We've been actually growing again. We've just hit 1 million views total of the channel, which is frigging insane. And yeah, I just feel pumped up and ready to make even more content for you guys. In any case, let's get into the video. I'm working in Blender 3.3. It's been a bit buggy for me. It just keeps crashing and going and crashing again. So bear with me if anything goes a bit awry in the actual project. So for now, we're just going to select everything and delete everything in the scene. So there's two main things in the animation. One is the growing animation and the other one is the object deformation animation, which is fairly easy to set up. First of all, let's create the base. The base of the animation is essentially working with curves. We're going to go Shift A, add a curve, and it's going to be a Bezier circle. And this circle, I've just scaled it up. Control A to reset the scale. And I'm going to go into my object data properties right here, and we're going to set up our little curve right here. We're going to go under fill mode, and instead of full, it's going to be half. The resolution preview, I'm going to drop it down to 6. What this does, it's going to actually have the number of cuts in the actual object. As you can see, if I lower it down, it makes like a rectangle. If you go up, it creates a very smooth circle. And this is going to then influence what you have in the end when you add subdivision modifiers. So we want to keep it fairly light. For now, the resolution of preview of 6 is completely fine. Let's go to geometry and add a bit of depth to it. So now when you open the depth, I'm going to leave it at 0.26, something like that. Let me just make sure I have the scale reset. You can see that now it's filling the half. This is the fill mode effect. So if we leave it at full, you have a torus. If we leave it at half, you have a half-eaten torus, so to speak. What I would usually do is just go into front view, because that's going to usually be the view from which I'm viewing with my camera. And then I would just start choosing some of these vertices or lines of the circle. And I will start moving them around with G and then rotating them randomly. You can also tilt the actual vertices by pressing Ctrl T. So you can do this. I would just go and try to create just a interesting kind of shape that hides and shows the objects a bit, just super random. Find something that works and you feel flows kind of nicely. Again, going into my front view, I want to open up the front a bit so it's a bit more revealing. This can be a bit of an issue later on, so we don't want to have this super aggressive triangle there. We just want to have like a nice little, curvature that is going to work for us. So we kind of expose that, just find something that is going to hide a bit, and then maybe also, we can tilt it like that, and then maybe we can tilt around our object a bit. So just experiment, have fun with it, make sure that you don't have any sharp edges and triangles, and that's going to be it. So we have our base right here. What I'm going to do immediately is press Shift D and duplicate this curve and drop the depth to 0 on our bevel. This is going to be the guide, and this is one of the main mechanics in this animation. So Control A, reset the scale, and then very important step is the Shift Control Alt C, origin to geometry. This puts the origin, this like little yellow dot right here, directly in the middle of the curve. And it's very important, because if you don't do that, your object is just not going to follow the curve correctly. Now that we have our little curve right here, let me go into the wireframe. Everything looks, I would say, is fairly decent. Maybe we can drop the resolution down a bit even more, make it a bit more aggressive, more efficient. And now it's time to create a object, or rather a mesh out of this. So Alt C and convert to mesh. This transforms our curve into a mesh. Now we're going to go into the modifiers, add a modifier chain, and this is the chain that I've used, which was a solidify, followed by a bevel, and then followed by a subdivision. The subdivision, I keep it at 1, 1. The solidify, we're going to go into the minus range, sort of like that. Minus 0.1 should be fine, around there. The bevel, we're going to crank it with the segments to 2, and then find a nice sweet spot of around 0.15, something like that. And if this looks choppy and not smooth, you can always direct the angle to about 60, and that should usually smooth most of your object out. If you feel that these lines are still a bit jagged, we still have a bit of, let's say, maneuverability here because we left a bunch of things outside earlier when we were doing the resolution stuff. So now it's time to add the growing animation. First of all, we're going to need a UV sphere, and we're going to add that UV sphere. So Shift A, select mesh, add UV sphere. This one, we're going to push it like a bit towards there. Now, the first thing we want to do is have our sphere travel around this curve. First of all, we need to have our cursor in our origin. So Shift S, cursor to selected. And then we select our sphere, and then we press Shift S and we choose selection to cursor. So that moves it directly into the origin point of the geometry. Now I want to set up not a curve modifier, which is this one, but I want to set rather a object constraint. This is going to be the follow path one. The follow path, we choose the path that we've created and we click animate path. If I press play, you can see that our little path is now animated, it's traveling around. And you can control this animation by clicking on your path, going into the object data properties, path animation, and you can change the frames. Let's say you can change, I don't know, 50 frames. This means that the ball is going to be way faster. If you change it to, let's say, 200, it's going to take 200 frames for the ball to travel around correctly. This is how you control the speed of your UV sphere. But now we need to have it travel in the actual line. We do that by returning to our first frame, choosing or selecting our path, going into edit mode, choosing the vertex that you can see this blue line is connecting to, press Shift S, cursor to selected, and then we choose the sphere, and this sphere we do Shift S, selection to cursor. And that's going to move the sphere there, and when we press play, you can see that our sphere is traveling along the path correctly. Now, what do we want to do with this? So I want to scale up the sphere so it's touching a bit the edges of our object right here, like our main object. And this is going to be the object on which we'll set a couple of things to grow. Super easy. However, the movement is still a bit choppy, and that's mostly because the resolution of our curve right here, it's not very high. So how do we correct that? Exactly. We go back into our resolution preview, and now you can see that the movement, when we increase that, is way, way, way smoother. You can see that the animation actually follows everything nicely. So now it's time to create that growing animation. And how is it done? So we're going to use two things. We're going to use a dynamic paint, brush, and canvas, and we're going to use a particle system. So we're going to set those things up. First things first, we set up the dynamic paint canvas. This means that the object is going to be painted on. So we want to take the dynamic paint, type canvas, add canvas, and I'm just going to set up a couple of things here. First of all, we want to choose the surface type to be weight. This is going to be a weight paint. Let me change our little mode to be weight paint mode so we can see what's happening. So blue means nothing is happening. Now, what I want to open is open the output and click plus here to add the vertex group weight. This is going to actually burn the information as it's flowing, following, however you want to call it. So now it's time to set up our sphere right here. So we're going to choose the sphere to be the dynamic paint, type canvas, brush, change it to brush, add the brush. Let's leave it at mesh volume for now. These should be completely fine. And if I choose my primary object again, you should see this weight paint being painted on our object. And this is exactly the information that we need. Now, we want this to be like a loopable type of animation. So I want to set up a dissolve. Dissolve means that this color actually wears out after some time. You can move the time to be a bit shorter. So let's say 100 frames should be completely fine. You can have a nice little dissolve time right there. Anti-aliasing is one of the things that creates, or rather makes, this paint a bit less choppy. And you can also increase the sub-steps to be a bit more precise. This usually adds a bit to the calculation times, but it's usually bears some good results in terms of the smoothness of the brush. So let's say this is functioning perfectly fine for us. I think this is, let's say, a good point. So now we need to take this information and feed it into the particle system. So I'm going to change from the weight paint back into my object mode. And let me go into my particle systems or particle properties. And I'm going to add a particle system here. So you can adjust the length to be, let's say, about 1 meter, something like that. So let me just play. You can see nothing is really happening with the hair system. That's because we still need to feed those maps that we were creating. So we do that by going into vertex group, density and length. Now, if you do density and length both, it's going to render out some super weird result. You just use the length. So you click on length, use the DP weight, and now you can see that the hair is growing just where the sphere travels. Now, in the original video, what I did was to just use the interior part of this, because as you can see, the hair are growing just inside of the thing. If I use the advanced and modifier stack, the hair, if there's enough influence, it should also be kind of like growing also outside of this. But for now, this is perfectly fine. I'm kind of happy with the result. I think also the speed, it's perfectly fine. If you feel like, you can also go under your line and the object data properties and increasing the speed, let's say to 140. This is also a fun one. Choose what you would like to grow. Now, let's say we want to have some, I don't know, we want to have some trees growing or stuff like that. I'm gonna use an asset from the, what is it, this Botanic. I use Botanic for a lot of things. It's actually very, very useful. I'm just gonna choose like, I don't know, a bonsai type of tree. What's this? Okay, this looks fine. This looks kind of fun. I'm going to convert it to editable and then just move GX to the side so I have this tree. Mind you, you can also search for something, let's say, on Blender Kit. This is also a very useful add-on if you don't have any paid plugins or stuff like that. Actually, let's check for some trees here. So let me check. Maybe we have some good trees right here. The important thing is to find something that is going to work for the application. This one, tree LOD0. This one seems to be, yeah, kind of cool. Okay, let's say that we're going to use this one. So how do I apply this tree to this curvature right here? Okay, let's go into our particle system. I'm going to drop down the number because otherwise it's going to be super heavy for the machine. I want to choose the render and then path, change to object. And now the instance object right here, choose the tree. You can see that the trees started to appear. Your machine is probably also going to start lagging a bit. We increase the scale. Usually you're going to have this type of problem where the orientation is going to be off whack. What I would suggest to do is just select again your object, and you're going to see this option, object rotation, under your object where you instanced your object. So object rotation, I select the original object, and now this is going to follow the rotation of the original object. So what I'm doing right now is just turning it by 90 degrees on the y-axis. And now you can see that it's actually following the correct orientation. So what I'm doing right now is just closing the sphere, the visibility of the sphere, so we can see what's happening with our trees. And yeah, you can see the trees start just popping randomly around, like growing and dispersing again. Now, before we continue with anything else, we want to do one thing, and that's bake our system right here. So I'm choosing the object that has the canvas, and you'll see this cache option, and press on that option to bake this dynamic animation. This means that when you're going to start to render, everything is going to be rendered out correctly. So yeah, we have our growing simulation situation ready. Last thing we want to do right now is just deform an object following that curve. So I'm going to show you just how to do that. So initially with our sphere, what we did was use a object constraint, which is a bit different than usually using a modifier. So I'm going to turn off the system for a bit so the viewport is not lagging. And I'm going to add a object that I was using for, let's say, the original project. I think it was like a microphone or something. This was the original microphone that I used. It's like a Shure download from, I think it was Sketchfab. You can find a bunch of free models right there. What we want to make sure is that the scale is applied. So Control A, apply the scale, and also the rotation. So Control A, apply rotation, or rather Alt R, and that's going to return it into your original position. We're going to select our microphone, add a modifier, and that's going to be a curve modifier. With the curve object, you choose the eyedropper and you choose the original line. Now you can see that everything is just deforming super weirdly. This was also happening to me initially. I'm going to choose my curve, press Shift S cursor to select it. So the cursor is put right in the origin point of my curve. I'm going to choose the microphone and then press Shift S selection to cursor. Now let me scale this bad boy down. And you can see that it's still being kind of weirdly deformed. And this is because the curve, when you use it as a modifier, it's going to kind of deform very weirdly your objects. So you need to do just a bit of rescaling work. In our case, it's just going to be S Shift X because we're just scaling it on the Y and Z axes. You go where the object looked normal at the beginning. So for example, this looks perfectly fine. And yeah, that's essentially it. Now we want to move it to travel around. I'm pressing GX and this is traveling on the X axis. So the way we're going to animate the microphone, let me split my screen right here for a second, and I'm going to choose this to be the graph editor. And now for the graph editor, we're going to do one thing. We're going to choose our microphone, press I, and inset a location. And this location, we can then look at it in the drop down of the object transformation in our graph editor. Let me press normalize so everything is shown on the 0 value, because otherwise it gets a bit wild. And I'm going to choose just the X location. That's the only location we want to move. I'm going to press N, go under modifiers, add a modifier, and here I can choose the generator. What the generator does, it just generates one line that goes with a given coefficient, basically meaning this is going to travel from point A to point B in a loop. So press Shift A, start the animation, and you can see right now it's fairly slow, but if we, let's say, make our line a bit steeper, you can see that the motion is way more fluid and it's traveling way faster. You can also do, let's say, 0.5. And this is going to be just super fast, but never mind. So right now what we want to do is open up our sphere again, and maybe we can choose the sphere, go under this little yellow box, object properties, and let's change the visibility in the viewport display to wire so we can see a bit better. Now, we see that our microphone is just moving way too fast. We want the microphone to follow our sphere right there. So I'm just going to set it to a super slow speed, let's say to 0.05. We can see that our sphere is traveling, let's say, way faster than the microphone. So let's just increase. Let's try and make the microphone catch our sphere right here, so that they travel at the same time. And basically where the microphone travels, the trees will also grow. For example, now it's still a bit slow, so we can just conform it like that. Let me just open up again the trees. And like I said, you can put whatever you'd like. So now, for example, it's going to look like wherever the microphone is going, trees are growing. But I would usually put something, let's say if it's something mechanical, I would put a mechanical component. Now let's try with a KitOps. I have this add-on that has some types of connectors, stuff like that. So I'm just going to add a connector. I'm going to add it as an insert. If you don't have this, again, you can try on Sketchfab or somewhere like that to find like this type of connector. So now I'm turning it around. And bear in mind, when we're going to use this, as our particle system here, we need to turn it by 90 degrees on the y-axis. So it's facing the same way as our tree right here. So let me choose our original object and exchange that tree with our insert. Now you can see there's a bunch of these inserts that are popping up, like trying to connect to the microphone. I don't know, it's just a super cool idea, super cool concept, and you can extend these to many other areas. Then later on, you can also use, let's say, geometry nodes to make cables connect to the input of the microphone, whatever. So yeah, basically this is the way you do the animation portion and the growing animation of the microphone. So yeah, hopefully you've learned something useful. Hopefully you've learned something new. There's a bunch of new tutorials coming out. This was requested on the YouTube Shorts and on my Instagram. A bunch of people really liked the animation and they wanted to see how it's done. So yeah, here you have it. In any case, as always, there's a free resource file in the description below that you're more than welcome to go and check out. Leave a like, drop a comment, subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Like I mentioned, we've had 1 million views. Couldn't be prouder of the community. And yeah, I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye.